This is a training video for how we train and rep out the three circles at a Made to Multiply gospel conversation training on Saturday. Before I jump into what we actually do in training the three circles, just a few words of wisdom on picking a gospel tool. Just a few things we've learned over the few years. One of the things that we ran into, we've seen this in a number of churches, that they offer I want to say an array of gospel tools, or maybe three or four or two. We have actually found that intuitively things like that seems to make sense. Offer them different options and different ways to do it. And what ends up happening in those situations is people end up using none of the options. So what we found is it is best when you find one tool and you ride that tool out. Now there's tremendous amount of diversity within the tool and flexibility, but use one tool and hammer down on that one tool. When you offer a buffet of options, what we found is, generally speaking, they use none of them because none of them really get perfected. So, with that said, there is also some other wisdom in whatever tool you do use. We would encourage you. There's basically five filters or things that you would use to evaluate what kind of gospel tool is best. Again, the best tool is one you use, but there is some filters or criteria you want to use when evaluating a good gospel tool. So I'm going to flip over my camera here and just talk about a couple of those things that we look for in a tool. The first thing we look for in a tool is one that I need to say this, it's biblical. I don't need to say that, but the drivetrain of the gospel is presented in this tool. It covers the most important pieces of information that are essential for salvation. That's a whole talk for another day, but at any rate, we'll just say that. The second thing we look for simplicity. And we have a saying is simple is good, simpler is better, simplest gets reproduced. So it needs to be somewhat simple. It can't be too complicated. Some people do debate that three circles is complicated. We have found that it's actually it's one of the more simpler tools. The third thing we look for is reproducing. Now, this is huge. This is only time tested or case studies. Is the tool reproducing to first, second, third, and fourth generations? And we have found that the three circles in our network, we can actually trace out the three circles almost to the 15th and 16th generation, meaning someone has trained someone who's trained someone who's trained someone, and so forth. So this is not theoretical. This is actually something that you've seen the tool go to several generations. It's proven itself, and so that's a real big one that it's actually getting to many generations. The fourth thing we look for is it visual. It doesn't have to be, but it certainly helps. I can tell you so many stories where it was so good for the person to actually track along verbally and visually, where they can actually see that. I've seen that in other cultures where maybe there's illiteracy and things like that. That's huge. And then lastly, and this is a combo, it's free and it's portable. And that's really key. Is it doesn't cost me anything to reproduce it, and I can take it anywhere. I can reproduce it on a napkin. It's not bulky. And so these are basically the five criteria we want to look for when choosing a gospel tool to train your network in. Okay, so these are the things we're looking for. We believe these five things are all found in the three circles. So at this point, what I want you to do is I want you to get another sheet of paper, just a blank 8x11 sheet of paper. And what we do at this point is we will take this sheet of paper if we're at the training. And we typically do this right after we've repped out what we do in the harvest. And you'll take the sheet of paper and you'll fold it just like this. All right. And then you'll fold it one more time to make four boxes, just like this. All right. So 4 boxes. And what you want to do, and while you're doing this, they're folding this, you're at the board and your whiteboard, you're breaking your whiteboard into 4 squares, right? And then you're going to number them. You're going to put 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you want, you can put 5 on the back right there. All right. So the first square, what we do is I tell them to put down their pens. Everyone just put down your pens. Do not write anything. Just listen to me. And so what I do is I model. Literally, we're going to do this several reps with the 3 circles. So, hey, thanks for letting me pray for you. I really do appreciate that. Do you mind if I share with you a story, or actually, it's a picture that has changed my life, and it gives me hope, and I actually draw it out. It helps me to remember, and I use 3 circles to do that. The first circle that I draw here is represents the world we live in, and I'm going to put this represents a broken world. And this is the world we currently live in. It's broken. It's clearly deteriorating as we speak. You can see the news. It's just getting worse. And so we consider this world broken. But originally, God didn't create the world broken. God created a world where we experienced his love. I'm going to put a heart here, experienced his love with him, in a perfect relationship with him and with other humans. And our minds were perfect, our bodies were perfect, uh, the environment was perfect, everything was just right. Um, but that world is long gone, and we got from this world over to this world because we all chose to do this one word. And I asked them, have you seen that word before? How would you define it? You let them talk, and then you come back and you actually define it for them. Your sin is any time we do something that is wrong, we shouldn't have done. And it's actually things we also should have done, we didn't do. And it's also bad thoughts. And so all of us have sinned. We've all fallen short of God's standard. So I stop right there and I go, okay, what I want you to do with your buddy is I want you to do exactly what I did and draw it out as I'm talking. Broken world, you can say a lot about that. You get them to agree that. Then you talk about God's original creation. He didn't create it that way at all. And we kind of know that. And how do we get from here to there? It's because every single one of us, except for one person, has chosen to go their own way. And that's called sin. And that lands us in a broken world. So go back and forth with your buddy real quickly and do that part. All right. So you give them a few minutes, you walk around the room, you make sure they're doing it. Then you come back, right? And you pick up again. Now, this time I'm going to add whatever I add in, I use a different markup. So I'm going to go a little bit quicker. Would you agree that we live in a broken and messed up world? In fact, the prayer request you gave me demonstrates brokenness. You're dealing with cancer and some things in your marriage. But what I want to tell you is originally, God did not create the world that way. And we kind of intuitively know that. And I put a heart here. God created a good world. In fact, he called it good 7 times. It was good in so many ways. We had good, perfect relationships with each other. Our bodies were right. Our minds were right. The environment was right. Everything was pristine. There was no need. It was a perfect place, actually. That's what I kind of call it. But we messed it up, and we've all messed it up. And it's because we've all chosen to do this one word, and that word is called sin. And it's whenever we go our own way. It's when we choose to do things we shouldn't do, or we don't do things we should have done. And it's even bad and evil thoughts. And that sin lands us in a broken world. In fact, we're born broken. And what happens is as we begin to live in this broken world, the brokenness will come and find you, whether you like it or not, in a million different ways. And what we start to do is we start to do all kinds of things to try to fix the brokenness, to cope with the brokenness, to entertain our minds, to escape from the brokenness, and even we'll try things to make us feel better and get back to God. And there's a million things. I mean, I'm just give you example: money, relationships, education, or we turn to destructive things like drugs and alcohol or pornography, or even we try food. That's not bad, but it's things we do. But the one that I see most often is we just try to be a good person and go to temple or church. The problem with all these is not that they're all bad, is they just don't work at fixing what broke us in that sin. So they just snap us back into brokenness and we go running after something and we live our lives in this vicious cycle of trying to fix things in brokenness, going in this cycle right here. And if we die in this vicious cycle, which most people do, two things are going to happen to us. We're going to be separated from God and from his love, and we're going to receive punishment for all that sin we've committed. And we've gotten away with 99.9% of it, but all our sin has to eventually be dealt with because God's a just God. All right. So what did I add here? We land ourselves in brokenness, and then our responses to brokenness. And you can put anything you want here. And they're squiggly lines, but they ultimately snap us back because they don't work. And of course, the good, being a good person. And what happens is if we die here, we're separated from God and we receive punishment and judgment for our sin. All right. Go back and forth and add this new piece. All right. So here we come to the third rep. This will take several minutes. And by the way, encourage them to use their own language here. And so here we go. All right. Hey, thanks for letting me pray for you. I really do truly appreciate that. I would love to share with you a story. I don't think I've ever shared this with you. And I draw it out. It kind of helps me to remember. And I use three circles to do it. The first circle represents the world we currently live in right now. And it is a broken and messed up world. I mean, we can see it every day in our own lives and in our world. It just seems to be deteriorating. But what I want to tell you is originally God didn't create the world that way. Intuitively, we kind of sense that God couldn't have created it that way. He didn't. He created a world where we experienced a perfect relationship with Him and with others. We had a perfect bodies. Everything was right. The environment was perfect. Everything. Our minds were perfect. Everything was good. And we experienced a full relationship with Him and with others. That world's long gone. And it begs the question, how did we get from here over to here? Well, we got from here in this good world over to here because of this one word. Have you seen that word before, sir? Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's a definition, but this word is actually it's things we did we shouldn't have done. Um, and it's things we should have done we didn't do. And it's actually also evil thoughts. And so we've all fallen short of God's standard in a million different ways. And what it does is it lands us in brokenness. In fact, we're born broken. And what happens is we start to do all kinds of things as we get older. We feel the brokenness and we all do different things to fix it, to cope with it, to get our minds off of it. There's just a million things, our retirement, our kids, our job, our money, our hobbies, all kinds of things, being a good person, trying to be religious. And some of these are really good things, but they just ultimately don't fix us. And they snap us back into brokenness. And we go finding something else and therapy, drugs, food, whatever. And it just doesn't work. And what happens is one day you're going to die in this vicious cycle. And two things are going to happen to you. One, you're going to be separated from that relationship with God. And two, that sin that you've committed, that we've all committed, not one of them can be swept under the rug, even though you got away with them. And God is going to punish all of our sin because he's just. But here's the good news is that God loved us so much. He didn't want to leave us in this vicious cycle over here. So what God did is God came down in the form of his son, Jesus Christ. He came down into a broken world. Jesus was perfect, unlike you, me. He never sinned, which means he could do something for us that we can never do for ourselves. He willingly went to the cross, a place of judgment, And all of my sin, this is a crazy idea. All of my sin, God says, you know what? You can't take it because you're imperfect. I'm going to pour it out on my perfect son, and he is going to receive the punishment you do. Amazing transaction. And then what happens, Jesus, he physically dies. His body goes in the ground and his spirit goes to be with the Lord. But God does something that's amazing. He actually raises Jesus' body from the dead. That's Easter, guys. When God did this, it authenticated Jesus was exactly who he said he was. He was the Son of God, and that death couldn't hold him in. And also, when Jesus did that, he canceled out your sin debt. Your sin is a debt to God, and he pays it. He also provides a doorway out of that broken cycle. Not to say that you're not going to do these things, you're just going to do them for different reasons. And he gives you a way back to having a restored relationship with God. All right, now what I want you to do is all this. What did we add? The transition between judgment and sin. This is huge. He loved us so much, and there was nothing we could do to break out of this vicious cycle. So he brings his son, sends his son, God himself, down into a broken world, dies on the cross, rises from the dead, authenticates who he is, cancels out our sin, brings a doorway out of that cycle. You're doing it, but for different reasons, back in a restored relationship with God. Now, everybody, I want you to practice this. Okay, go back and forth. All right, here we go. Fourth rep. Man, thank you so much for letting me pray with you. I would love to share with you a story of hope that's changed my life, and I actually draw it out and I use three circles. It kind of helps me remember. And anytime, stop me. This represents the world we live in right now, and it is a broken and messed up world. It seems to be deteriorating, and there is good things in this world, but it seems to be getting worse and worse. And we say it's broken. But we intuitively have to sense that God could not created a world like that. And actually, in the beginning, he didn't. God actually created a good world. In fact, it was very good. There was no death, there was no crime, there was no racism, there was no divorce. Our minds were perfect, our bodies were right, and we experienced a perfect relationship with each other and with God. There was no tension between the two. There was absolute peace and harmony between us and people in the environment. But this world is long gone, and it begs the question, how do we get from here over to here? And we got there because of one word that we all have done. Have you seen this word before? Yeah, it's a common word. And how would you define that word? You listen. And so then you say, yeah, that word could be that, but it's much more. It's actually any time we disobey God and we don't do things we should do. And then it's actually things we should have done we didn't do. And to make it worse, it's actually evil thoughts we have. And so all that sin, that cumulative sin breaks the world and actually breaks us. We're born broken. We're going to sin eventually. And so what we do is we get older, we try to do things to fix our brokenness, to run from our brokenness, to escape from our brokenness, or just get our minds off this brokenness. And there's a million different things people turn to hobbies, jobs, people, relationships, working out, their body, trying to really work hard and be a good person. They just don't work long term. They might work for a period of time or for years. They'll just snap you back in, and then you go finding something else, snap you back in, and go find you can be your grandchildren, vacations, money, retirement, good people. It just doesn't work. And what happens is if you live your whole life right here, which most people will, and when they die, if you die right here in this vicious cycle, two things are going to happen to you. You're going to be separated from a relationship with God because all your sin has to be dealt with somewhere. And you will receive the punishment personally, although you've gotten away with 99% of it. So God saw this mess we were in and knew there was nothing we could do to free ourselves from that. So God, in his kindness and mercy and love, decided to intervene and step in. And what he did was 2,000 years ago, he sent his son, Jesus Christ, down into a broken world. And Jesus was perfect, unlike you and me, which made him a perfect recipient and sacrifice to take the brunt of all your sin. All your sin is poured out on him. No one has ever done that for me, ever taken the punishment for something other than Jesus. He actually dies. His body's put in the ground, but this is cool. God raises him 3 days later to prove that Jesus was exactly who he said he was and that death could not hold him. No one has ever risen from the dead and stayed risen from the dead. That means he was exactly who he said he was. When he did that, he canceled out your sin debt that was to God. He creates a doorway out of that cycle. You're going to do these things, but for different reasons. And he gives you a way back to having a restored relationship with God. But this is a gift, and a gift must be received. It's not automatic. So, what do you do to receive this gift and these benefits? Well, you have a responsibility. The first thing you got to do is you have to believe it. And I put a heart right here. You have to believe it with your heart, not just know it. Truly believe that Jesus did this for you. And once you believe that, out of a sense of gratitude, you surrender your life to Jesus, not out of earning, but out of gratitude. Now, you ever heard that word surrender? What comes to your mind when you hear that word surrender? So bring them back in right there. Yeah. Yeah, that you're giving up. In fact, what we say is you give up and you make Jesus the Lord of your life. And that's a attempt at a crown. He becomes the king of your life and you begin to follow him. And then this crazy thing happens and you might not feel it, but from God's perspective, you become new. You become a new creation. The old way of thinking and acting begins to pass away and you begin to grow in your relationship with God. And then he sends you back out into this broken world to go and tell your friends and family that are caught in this vicious cycle about what Jesus Christ has done for you. So he just doesn't leave you sit here to grow and marinate. He actually sends you back out into your friends and family. Oops, I should have done that in red. This was so this was new right here. Believe how you receive this, believe and surrender the crown, right? And then go, grow and go, and then the go piece. All right. So those are the new pieces that we added to this. All right. Do that rep, and then we'll pick up at that point. All right. So at this point, we turn this over and we do the last rep on the back, if that works well. And the reason we do this last rep is we haven't done the 411 in the training yet. That will come in the afternoon, but this is where we do the last rep and we actually close it out with the diagnostic question. So real quickly, here we go. Hey man, I really appreciate you letting me share the gospel or pray with you. Sorry. But I want to share with you the gospel and what it is. It's a story that it's really changed my life and it gives me hope. And, I can never share it enough. And I actually use 3 circles to do it and it helps me to remember. And so I'm going to use this whole backside here. Would you agree that we live in a broken and messed up world? Yeah, you can see it everywhere. There's just so much evidence that this world is broken. But what I want to tell you is originally, God did not create the world broken. He created it good. In fact, he called it good 7 times and he called it very good at the end. There was none of the brokenness we're dealing with right now. No broken bodies, no broken minds, no broken hearts. Absolutely fulfilled lives that are whole in harmony with each other and with God. The environment is broken, perfect, but that world's long gone. We got from this world over to this world because we all have chosen to do this one word. How would you define that word? Yeah, that's a good way to define it. Sin is whenever we go our own way, we just distrust God's plan for our life, and we decide, you know what, we know what's best, and we do it in a million ways. It's things we shouldn't have done, right? We've done, so it's things we do. It's things we don't do that we should have done, and it's even thoughts we think of. So ultimately, we all fall short of God's standard, and what that does is it lands us in a brokenness. In fact, Your sin, you're born broken. You don't have a choice. You're going to eventually do things. And what happens is, as you get older, you're going to look around the world and you're going to see all these ways to kind of try to fix yourself. And this is going to be natural to try to fix, cope, get your mind off things, entertain. And there's just a million things we can do here. I know one guy told me Netflix one time, the Cowboys, your 401k, food, your spouse, your grandkids, or just being a good person. There's a million things. They're not bad. They just don't, they were never intended to fix you. They're just meant sometimes to entertain you for a while, make you feel good, but they snap you back and you go running after one thing after another, or you keep just going back to the same thing, hoping for the same high or whatever. They can be good and bad things, but they just don't work. And what happens is if you live your whole life in this cycle, which most people will, I was right there. What's going to happen when you die, and we all die, is you're going to be separated from a loving God in a relationship with Him. And all that sin that you've even admitted to has to be dealt with. 99% of the sin you've gotten away with. Not one of them can be swept under the rug and overlooked because God's just. He has to do, He can't just willingly walk away from our sin. So you're going to receive the punishment for your sin. This is bad news. Here's the good news. The good news is God saw this mess that we were in and we caused, and He decided to initiate a way to figure this out and get us out of it. And what He did is He decided, the King of the universe decided to come down in the form of His Son, Jesus Christ. This is crazy. There's no other religion that God does this. He comes down and solves it. He's perfect. He never sins. He comes down, shows us how to live, shows us the ideals, but more than that, He goes at the end of His life, goes to the place, this cross, and He says, there I will take all your sin, past, present, and future, and it's going to be poured out on me. I'm going to take the brunt. A perfect living being takes the brunt of all your sin. And then He dies. His body is actually placed in the ground. But the cool part is God raises His body from the dead. Incredible. That's called Easter. This is actually Christmas. And when this happened to Jesus, it authenticated who He was. He truly was the Son of God, and death could not hold Him back. And there were several benefits that happened because of this that are now open to you. One, all that sin, that debt that you owe to God, paid totally in full. Two, He creates a doorway out of that broken cycle back into a restored relationship with God through only what Jesus did. But this is a gift. The gift has to be received. And the way you receive this gift is you can't receive it on your terms. There's actually the way to receive this gift is very specific. You got to believe it. But believe it with your heart, not with just your mind, but with your heart. And once you believe it, then out of a sense of gratitude, you surrender your life to Jesus. And not of an earning, but out of a sense of gratitude. When you hear that word, what comes to your mind? What do you think of pulls them back in? Yeah, that's right. You give up, things like that. And what we say is at that point, Jesus becomes the Lord and the King of your life. He becomes that's a crown. And then what happens is whether you feel it or not, from God's perspective, you're new. You're a new creation. The old way of thinking and acting begins to fade away, and this new life becomes, and you begin to grow in your relationship with God and with others. But He just doesn't leave you to sit and marinate and grow. He actually has a purpose for you. He sends you back to this broken world where your friends and family are almost like an ambassador for this message to tell them about what's happened to you. Now, there's only two kinds of people in the world, contrary to what anybody else will say or Oprah. There's people over here who are in a restored relationship with God because they believed and surrendered. And then there's people over here in this broken cycle, right? Who who maybe have even heard this story, but have never truly surrendered Where do you see yourself in this picture? All right. That's how we end. I hope that helped. That's how we rep out the three circles.